Hey y'all, it's Sally Loftus, author of the Fully Human Resources newsletter here on LinkedIn. And today I'm excited that I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Lindsey Sands. Hi, Lindsey. Welcome.
Hi, Sally. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me. Before we get started, we're going to have a conversation about leadership and reward and recognition and how to be a supportive manager. But I would love for you to introduce yourself to this audience.
Absolutely. And once again, super happy to have this conversation with you today. My name is Lindsey Sands. I am a learning and development executive and an organizational development practitioner. That's a little bit of a mouthful, but essentially, my areas of focus have always been team effectiveness, making sure that teams work well together, diversity and inclusion, and looking at all of these areas through a perspective that is always strategic and based in science. My background is also highly rooted in entertainment. I always joke that because I'm from LA, I didn't even know there were other industries to work in. So my background is heavily based in working in entertainment and making sure that companies are able to work in the most effective ways, because we spend the most amount of time at work. We spend more time with our colleagues than we do our friends and family. So I feel very passionate about creating an experience where people enjoy their work and are able to be engaged and innovative and work at the best companies that we help facilitate.
Well, Lindsey, I'm excited to talk about our monthly topic, which is reward and recognition. And I started this newsletter and called it Fully Human Resources because I feel like so much humanity is being sucked out of the workplace, right? It's not about AI, technology, anything like that. It's just that people sometimes are expected to kind of check their identities at the door and not be a full person at work. And boy, that comes up a lot with reward and recognition. And I'm thinking about there was some research that came out from Gallup recently around why people leave their jobs. And the second reason behind pay, of course, was their managers. And I know you've done some research in this area around kind of how leaders show up in workplaces and be supportive. What are some ways that leaders can reward and recognize their employees in meaningful ways?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought up the Gallup statistic, because I think it plays a really important role in looking at the connection between engagement and the manager. I'm a certified strengths coach with Gallup, so I've also done a little bit of research or received their statistics. And there's even another statistic from Gallup that says that 70% of an employee's engagement is based on their manager. And that is quite a significant amount, which means we really need to be paying attention to how our managers are developing and how we make sure they're the most supportive, because they have the most impact on retaining their employees. And a few ways that I think that managers can do a better job of making sure they're supporting and creating engagement with their employees are actually pretty simple. I look at recognition as something that is cheap and very easy to do. You just have to implement it. Simple things like, one, if somebody works on a project, give them credit for it. I know we've heard of some difficult instances where maybe a manager takes credit for the work of one of their direct reports, but simply saying, hey, this person helped me out with this project, they did a great job, goes a long way. And simply coming at being a manager from that appreciative standpoint. I look at simple things like, when I said the idea of recognizing people and for the work that they do, and then also appreciating when they do a good job, giving them feedback in real time. I think we often look at feedback as something that needs to happen when something's gone wrong. If somebody did something great, simply saying, hey, you did a great job, thank you for your work on this, keep practicing this behavior. It really makes a big difference. And once again, I say recognition, just showing somebody that they've been seen, makes the biggest difference in how an employee is going to approach their work. And it is a cheap way to make sure that your employees are most engaged. You don't necessarily need ping pong tables and pizza parties. Simple appreciation, I think, is the word that stands out to me of what needs to happen and when we're working with managers.
I appreciate your comments there because what I heard you say is that words matter and not just like in these formal times when we're having meetings with our managers or maybe performance reviews, but even like in team meetings or everyday interactions. So I know reward and recognition is one way that a manager can support their employees. What are some other ways that managers or can act or behave or show up in ways that retain their employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And just going off of what you just said, I think it just relates to consistency matters. But to answer your question of what type of traits make for supportive managers, I think it comes back to basics once again, which is humility makes a very big difference. I think we have to remember that being a leader is not a position that's really about ego. It's more about being um, humble, because having the privilege to have ownership of somebody's career or help somebody along is a very humbling experience, rather than something that should be looked at as a tool for power, of something that you're going to hoard over at somebody. So I think that there needs to be a shift in looking at being a manager as a humbling position, a role where you're supporting and mentoring somebody. And then number two, I would say empathy makes a really big difference in being a leader. I always say it would be very easy to do our jobs if we didn't have to deal with humans. Not that we shouldn't deal with humans, but when you're dealing with humans, emotions are going to come up, mistakes are going to be made, and we need to relate to each other on that level. That's why I really appreciate that you brought up bringing humanness back into the workplace. And I think that goes a long way when you hear what somebody is saying to you, even if you listen to what your direct reports say to you. There's nothing better than being seen and being heard. And that doesn't mean that because your direct report says, I don't want to do this assignment, that you just cave in and that you say, okay, you don't have to do it. But there is something to acknowledging. I think that I understand that this might be a difficult task, and just saying, I hear you or I see you can help move along the assignment. So I think it's very important for us to look at how we listen to others rather than take on this role as a manager that's very much a dictator. If you ever find yourself as a manager saying things like, well, I told them to do it, then that's not enough reason just because you have a title to make somebody do something. So one, humility; two, empathy. And then the third one I'm going to bring up is this idea of challenging your direct reports. I want us to have empathy, of course, and build these relationships where we're working with people. But I also don't want to send the message that because we're empathetic and we listen to people, that means that we take it easy on them, and that we don't challenge them in any way. There's still a need for development in that way. We want to encourage our direct reports to surpass what they think is their level of skill. We don't want people will be bored if they're doing things that they know how to do and can execute perfectly. And it is a manager's duty to customize, have interactions, build a relationship with the person so that they can figure out what is the best way to help challenge this person and build up their skills. It's not just about, okay, we have this perfect relationship, everything is pleasantries. We need to figure out, how do we take this person to the next level? I think some of the best managers that I have had are people who believed that I could do things that I was unsure were things I should take on, but they trusted me to implement or take on a project that maybe I hadn't worked on before. And that made the very biggest difference in me upping my skill set. And that is a big part of being engaged. We don't want to be bored and just do things that we've done 100 times over. So those are the three things that I would consider in building up yourself as a manager.
Thank you, Lindsey. I felt like that was a really good synopsis of just really some kind of key traits there, right? Humility, empathy, and challenging your direct reports. Because a lot of times people will be like, oh, great leaders, do they really get results without kindness? But great leaders do get results with kindness, right? And with accountability. And so thinking about, we may have somebody who's listening to this today who is thinking about going into to a leadership position, whether that's supervising other people or maybe leading a really big project across departments or within a big organization. So, what are some of the strengths that people can kind of build as they become a leader or supervisor one day?
Yeah, and I think that it's great if there's somebody who's not already in that position of leadership and they're thinking about it now. It's actually a preference for me to think about it early because it shows intentionality. And a lot of times, once we get into that the position of managing, it might be a little bit of a late start because we often move into roles of managing people because we're really, really talented at a technical skill or a skill of some sort. And as we rise, because we're very good at our technical skill, we get direct reports under us and we don't necessarily recognize that the skill set to be a manager is very different than the skill set that got you promoted. And people just continue rising and sometimes make it all the way to the top without even having gotten any type of training or thinking about what type of manager they want to be. So I would say one, it starts with intentionality of thinking of what type of manager you want to be. I like to start sometimes by asking people the question, what's one word that you would want your direct reports to use to describe you? And then if you can think of what that one word is, that can be your guiding light for how you want to behave. And when situations come up, then you can think through what are the actions, what are the behaviors that are going to show that I am this item, this thing. And I think so intentionality is a huge thing because when we just go off to the races and start doing something without thinking about it, being strategic, we can end up in situations that choose us rather than we choose to be in those situations. And another piece that I think is important as you build up your strengths as a leader is self-awareness. Self-awareness, I could go on a soapbox about this, but this is the first step, if not step 0.5 to leading, is understanding how you are showing up in any given situation. Because a lot of times, if we are just we might end up projecting on other people if we're not thinking of what is my role that I play in this situation. If, for example, giving feedback, if you haven't been somebody who's very in tune to what triggers you, how you show up, you might give feedback to your direct report that might have been feedback that maybe you received previously, and you're just passing it on rather than something that relates directly to them. And so I just really feel in my core that we have to have some type of understanding of how am I contributing to this situation. And that relates to also the humility that I referenced earlier. We have to have the humility to say, what is my role in this situation? How did I impact the way my direct report is interacting with me? What are ways that we build self-awareness? I always love the quote that we learned in our MSOD program, which was the irony of self-work is that we can't do it alone. I can think that I'm the best person in whatever area, but how do I know that that's true if I don't have a conversation, if I don't ask somebody? How do I know that I'm actually a great manager? Why don't I ask my direct reports? Hey, how is my management style working for you? How can we work better together? So feedback is the number one thing that I would consider if you want to build up your self-awareness. Seek out feedback from not only your managers, but your direct reports. How are you going to know how your relationship's going? How are you going to know if you are being the manager that you say you want to be, if you haven't had that opportunity to reflect on it with other people? And I would also remember that this is a constant development. It's not like you get to a point where if your direct report says, hey, I think you're doing a great job, and then you think, okay, I checked that box, never have to work on this again, I'm all set. So it is a consistent thing. And even if you don't have direct reports now, you can start by asking for feedback from your peers. I think they often think of the people above us, but how do we reflect upon the people who work probably more closely with us and start getting that accurate representation of who we are? I think it makes a very big difference in how we show up when the time presents itself.
Yeah, I love everything you said right there. And I think that's one thing. I actually just recorded a podcast earlier this week about helping people manage hybrid work environments. And that was the one piece of advice I gave for supervisors is be in community, be around people. It doesn't have to always be formal, right? You can just be like, how are people responding to me in this meeting? Or, just ask people, how did what I say sounded or land for you? Just, those little things can make a huge difference. So thank
Absolutely.
you.
And what you were saying just actually really struck me to the relationship of to start off, you were talking about humanness and
Hmm.
how within ourselves too, I'm saying you need to give feedback, you need to ask questions to make sure you know how you're landing, but relate that humanness to yourself as well. I know that we can often look at ourselves through this perfectionist lens and know that there are going to be paths along the way where you might make a mistake, and to just also give yourself grace there too and recognize you are human too, even if we want to think that we're perfect. I like to think that sometimes, but we have to know that we're going to make mistakes along the way.
Woo, we need more grace in the world.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lindsay. I really appreciate it. And thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Sally. It was great chatting with you.